Hey, what's up guys, Totallydubbed here, and today I'm doing a video review on the Samsung CHG70. Now this is the brand new Samsung monitors with the quantum dot technology, but most importantly, the very first consumer HDR gaming monitors. Now on the right hand side you've got the 27-inch variant, and on the left hand side you've got the 32-inch variant. Now before I get into this review, I want to cover a few things. First of all, I'm running at the moment on my MSI GTX 960. However, to conduct my test in glory of HDR, and in order to have HDR supported, you're going to need to have a relevant graphics card. I'll put them down in the description below, so make sure you check them out. But I would like to shout out to Sapphire for actually lending me out a RX 580 8GB in order to conduct my HDR test. So thanks to them for allowing me to use that graphics card. So now let's go into the price. So the price of the 27-inch variant in the UK can be found for around £600. The 32-inch variant can be found for £650. In the US, you can find the 32-inch variant for $650 and the 27-inch variant for $600. So yes, in the UK it's a lot more expensive, and given the fact that I live in the UK, I'll be reviewing it with the UK price in mind. Now, what do you get for all that money? So first of all, the differences between the two monitors. Before getting into like the technical specs of them, the only difference that you should really notice between the two is the size and the way the monitors are powered. The 27-inch variant has a small little power brick which you connect up, and it connects up with a proprietary port to 27-inch. The 32-inch, however, has a normal kettle plug, and apart from that, the ports, the versions that they come with, the technology found on the panel, the build quality and everything like that is identical between the 32-inch and the 27-inch. In my tests, I conduct them on the 27-inch, but as you can see, I've got a 32-inch over here, which I also used for comparison. Now, let's talk about specs. So, first of all, you're running on a VA panel, that's a quantum dot technology as well. You've got a 16:9 aspect ratio, you're running at 2560 x 1440p. You've also got a response time, a quoted response time of 1 millisecond. That's with MPRT, which is a proprietary technology from Samsung themselves. Other than that, there are display ports and HDMI inputs. That's HDMI 2.0 and DisplayPort 1.4. You're running at 144 Hz, and most importantly, you have HDR technology built in. This also means that it's got AMD FreeSync 2.0, and AMD FreeSync 2.0 is essentially just like AMD FreeSync, except it has HDR capabilities. In case you're wondering, will it work on an older RX like 480? Of course it will. If you've got a AMD FreeSync enabled card, then FreeSync 2.0 will work because it will be automatically upgraded. You'll just need the monitors in order to cope with the HDR output, and that's about it. So other than that, if there's any other specs, make sure you check them in the description below. For example, VESA mounts and whatnot, check them down in the description below. I'm not going to bore you with that. So first of all, let's talk about build quality. Now the build quality of the monitors are actually fantastic. I really like what Samsung have done. First of all, in comparison to the last year's 2016 model, they've removed the circular stand which some people complained about. They've turned it into like a triangular shape, which means that if you want to put like a soundbar underneath, or if you just want more space on your desk, you can do so. However, do bear in mind the actual stand themselves are actually quite big. The monitors can be fully adjusted. You've got height adjustment, tilt, rotate, pivot, all the normal that you'd expect from a high-end monitor. In terms of bezels, they're relatively thin, they're not too chunky either, so therefore they're not distracting. And best of all, Samsung have kept their curve nature, so you've got 1800R curvature. Now to me personally, I don't think it's a big deal. However, it does add a slight extra immersion over a non-curved version, so it's great to see it included, and Samsung tell me that it doesn't actually add any extra price to the consumer, at least that's what they say. So in terms of build quality and design, I've got absolutely no complaints. I should also mention, and you'll probably see in a video right now, that the backlight of the monitor has been changed. Previously it was placed underneath the monitor, and now it's been placed at the back of the monitor. It's great to have it there. However, I found the light source to be quite weak. However, if you remove the little plastic plate, which you'll be able to see in a video right now, then you'll essentially brighten up the blue hue which is displayed and make it a lot more useful. So if you're in a dark lit room, I would highly suggest removing this plastic aesthetic essentially, and in order to really enable from the arena lighting, as Samsung call it. So that's build quality out the way, and what about its on-screen display? So the on-screen display hasn't changed at all. I like the fact that Samsung have kept its really good on-screen display. I must say it's one of the better on-screen displays out there in the market. It's not something special, but I want to run you through some of my settings. So first of all, in terms of game settings, refresh rate 144 Hz, black equalizer 13, response time. Now I should mention something about this, and I'll get into the gaming section, is that if you are to adjust the response time down to fastest or faster, then unfortunately the monitor gets a lot dimmer, and you'll probably notice this in a little while when I show you some Counter-Strike, so bear that in mind. It basically reduces it from 400 kelvins to 250 kelvins, and to me that's too dark in a bright sunlit room. However, if you're gaming at night, then you won't find its faster or fastest response time brightness reduction to be much of a problem. Now FreeSync, you've got standard engine, ultimate engine. They both have a full FreeSync range, which on top of my head I can't remember, but I'll make sure to put that down in the description below. They've got a full FreeSync range, which if I'm not mistaken, it's 46 Hz to 144 Hz. You've got a full FreeSync range, and no matter if you are on standard or ultimate, and no matter if you're on HDMI or DisplayPort. So make sure to check that out in the description below. I'll be sure to give you the accurate information. Low input lag is enabled. On the picture setting, I've got it on custom. sRGB is pre-calibrated to sRGB as well, which is fantastic. However, I prefer using it custom, and the reason why is because the color settings, I actually reduced the reds to 43 and leave both green and blue on 50. Personally, I felt the reds were a little bit overblown. I'm not sure why, given the fact they're factory calibrated to sRGB. Nevertheless, that is my preference. You don't have to stick to it, but that's what I personally use. Other than that, on-screen display and system settings are nothing too special. You've got USB supercharging mode, which you will have to use the relevant USB 3.0 hub at the back in order to get 1.5 amps through the USB port to charge your device. You've got DisplayPort version, which you should have on 1.4 and HDMI on 2.0 in order to get full HDR capabilities at 144 Hz. And then lastly, you've got the information with serial number and whatnot. So the on-screen display is a great addition, and yet again Samsung have done a great job with that. So now let's talk about gaming. Now my game of choice is Counter-Strike Global Offensive, and it's pretty much a very competitive game, obviously depending on how you play it. At my level, I play a very high level of Counter-Strike, and I expect the most responsive and best monitors in terms of input lag and response time. So first of all, the input lag. The input lag is minimal. It's actually very good. It responds to my inputs very quickly, and I had no problems with the monitor at playing competitive games. However, the response time on the standard setting is too slow in order to be used on a competitive game like Counter-Strike. If you're playing a game like Dota 2, which is also competitive but doesn't require fast FPS, the same sort of requirements as a fast FPS like Counter-Strike, then standard mode is absolutely fine. Games like Battlefield 1 benefit from being played at a standard mode setting. However, if you do want to boost down the response time of the monitor, I highly suggest going down on the response time settings and going to faster or fastest. Now you might notice straight away, even on the camera, that the picture is a lot duller, something that I mentioned before. Now this does impact my play because it's a bit too dull in order to be used in a bright sunlit condition. However, if I want to be playing competitive games, then I have to play on the faster settings, because then the monitor is perfectly capable in handling competitive games such as Counter-Strike. So yes, this game can be used for competitive games, and it can be used for standard casual games. And obviously, depending on that game that you're playing, you should adjust the settings via the OSD to reflect that. So that's what I think of the gaming. But now, how does the monitor do in terms of its panel and, most importantly, HDR? Now the panel quality, obviously it's a VA running quantum dot technology, and I must say it's fantastic. It's not perfect, but it's fantastic. Starting off with the colors. The colors are very accurate. They've got loads of life to them, and just generally speaking, the image is vibrant, which is something that is kind of lacking in other monitors out there, especially TN panels. But versus a very good IPS panel, I felt this VA panel, just like the last year's model, just was slightly washed out. It seems like it's almost like if it was like the gamma scale of the monitor was a little bit off. Obviously, this is not the case when you look at the factory calibration reports. However, just from the naked eye, that's what I felt. Now, in terms of the colors, you'll get loads of popping colors, loads of accurate colors which are being displayed, and in terms of just generally how the monitor was portraying different images in games and movies was absolutely fantastic. No real complaints in that respect. I actually ran it through the calibrator and it hit 99.5% sRGB and 88% DCI-P3. Which means you can use this monitor for editing in different color spaces, and in terms of its color accuracy, it hit a 1.75 delta E, which is fantastic. That's an average delta E of 1.75. Maximum luminance was 400 kelvins, and I had 0.15 black level, which is fantastic, and a ridiculously high contrast ratio of 2500. Now, Samsung were very much kind enough in order to let me borrow their very expensive color meter, which was the K10A, and that is a £9,000 calibrator, and when I put it through that, the contrast ratio, the dynamic contrast ratio, went through the roof to over 13,000. So yes, it has got the capabilities, and yes, you've got limitations with certain calibrators such as the i1 Display Pro, which I had and which I used for testing. So do bear that in mind. In terms of uniformity check, I had no problems. You'll be able to see through this image. Well, probably not see the numbers, but it does fantastic for a gaming monitor. Obviously, it's not as good as a professional grade monitor that constantly is calibrated. However, for gaming purposes, it's fantastic. Would I be using this for video editing and photo editing? Absolutely. It passes pretty much all the checks that I would want it to do for that purpose. So yes, it's a multi-purpose monitor. So, what about HDR? Its main selling point of HDR. Now, as you remember at the beginning of the video, I said about HDR compatibility. So first of all, you're going to need the right graphics card. That's not to say that you can't run a HDR image on a non-compatible graphics card, because you'll be able to see right now me enabling HDR on Windows and it working perfectly fine with the GTX 960. But you might be going, hold on a second, when you just changed HDR there, the colors went completely AWOL. Something went completely off. You'd be right in saying that, because HDR in Windows 10 is an absolute pain in the ass. It's not like HDR on TVs where you've got a Blu-ray player automatically picking HDR. On Windows 10, HDR is being picked up as a TV, not a monitor, and therefore it completely skews the colors, skews the gamma, skews everything you can imagine, apart from if you were to launch a HDR game. So Samsung were, again, kind enough to provide me testing equipment for that, and a HDR game that I tested on was Shadow Warrior 2. That's got full HDR capabilities with a color artist working on HDR and not an SDR. Now right now you'll be able to see some of the footage that I have on Shadow Warrior. One thing I should mention is that on HDR I had to reduce the gamma, which is slightly odd because on gamma scale 1 on SDR versus HDR, the HDR image seemed a lot washed out. It didn't make sense to me, but that was the case. However, when you reduce the gamma scale to 0.8 or to 0.65, depending on your preference, then the HDR image becomes a lot better. It's not washed out, and suddenly you've got the colors and the deep blacks coming out as you would expect. So you might be wondering, why would I adjust the gamma scale in order to have a better HDR image? Well, that's just because of how it works and how the developer has basically colored their game with HDR at a certain gamma scale, so therefore you're going to have to adjust that. In terms of how HDR compares with SDR, I must say HDR looks fantastic. And looking at a HDR image which has been properly calibrated, not at gamma scale 1 at 0.8 instead, then the HDR image looks brilliant. I could properly see the sun in the background. The colors were a lot more accurate. The sword, the pistol had a lovely glint coming off them from the sun. The car, which you probably saw in the image, didn't look overblown, and just the general image quality was sensational. Remember, HDR is picky, and HDR does depend on how the color artist does it. That also applies for SDR, don't get me wrong, but with HDR you have to just pay a little bit more attention to it. So if you got HDR working on Windows 10, does it work for everything else? Well, yes, I actually hooked up a Xbox One S, plugged it via HDMI, and HDR was picked up flawlessly via the Xbox. Meaning I could play 4K, well, I couldn't play 4K, but I could play HDR content via 4K Blu-ray, and obviously it'd be downscaled to 1440p or 1080. And it worked flawlessly. HDR was picked up flawlessly and had no problems. Watching Netflix at HDR via the Xbox One S was not a problem. Now this is something to bear in mind, because this means that HDR can be used in other circumstances, not just Windows. However, we're talking about a PC gaming monitor here. We're not talking about a TV, we're not talking about a HDR enabled 4K Blu-ray monitor or whatever it is. It's a PC gaming monitor. So for HDR in PCs right now, Samsung are basically ahead of the curve. They've produced a HDR monitor, a gaming monitor to be precise, and unfortunately the industry hasn't caught up just yet. There's not enough content out there. There's like a handful of games essentially that support HDR, at least full HDR capabilities, and on top of that, Windows completely screws up with HDR, meaning that if you were to enable HDR in Windows, you would see all the colors completely skewed and completely all over the place, which is not something that the average Joe would like to experience. Unfortunately, this is the situation, and Samsung can't get really around it. However, it is something to bear in mind. If you were to purchase this monitor right now, you are essentially paying a premium for the HDR technology. And that pretty much leads me on to my conclusion. Is this monitor worth it? Well, it just depends on you and your use. This monitor is fantastic. It's got all the sort of things that I would want from a gaming monitor. It's got very fast response time, it's got a low input lag, it's got 144 Hz, it's got the curvature, it's got good build quality, design, it runs at 1440p, it's got all the right inputs and outputs, it's got everything that you'd need. However, would I pay an extra over, for example, the Acer XF270HUA, which is a non-curved 1440p 144 Hz IPS panel? Personally, I wouldn't, because I don't have HDR content to really benefit from. I haven't got HDR content that I really want to watch, and I don't think the industry's has really moved on in terms of the PC gaming, PC industry or PC gaming industry to HDR. And therefore, I can't really see myself recommending the monitor. But again, that's for me. That's something that I wouldn't personally use. It doesn't mean other people won't use it. So it's up to you guys. Other than that, guys, hopefully you've enjoyed this review. If you've liked it, make sure you give it a like, subscribe if you want to see more content like this, favorite and share as it always helps the channel grow, and more than anything, let me know in the comments below what you think of the monitors. Do you think it's worth it? Do you think HDR is too soon? Or do you think that HDR really has to take off and therefore we want to see more manufacturers with it? There we go, guys. I've been Totally Dubbed. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Take care and bye-bye.